Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So, delighted and honored to be here. I'm not a big data researcher, I'm a privacy researcher. In fact, I'm an economist by training, and I use a combination of economics, behavioral decision research, and data mining, trying to understand how people make decisions about protecting or sharing their data, and what impact these decisions have on themselves and society as a whole. Today, in these 15 minutes I review, I set myself a very tall order. My goal, or perhaps my dream, is to try to affect, at least for some of you, the way you think about privacy. That's why I chose as a title, Reframing the Privacy Debate. There are a number of frames, a way to think about the privacy debate. And some of them I would like to challenge today. Two frames that you can see more and more often in the both scholarly and public debate over privacy is that people don't really care that much about privacy. In fact, the usage and the success of social media are symptomatic of a lack of specific desire for privacy. Or in fact, privacy is a modern invention. We didn't have much privacy at all back in the days. We all lived in this mythical village where everyone knew each other. And therefore, today, when through internet technologies, both our professional and personal lives are continuously monitored and scrutinized, well, that's really going back to the normal state of humankind, a state of lack of privacy. I would challenge that based on the work of anthropologists, historians, social psychologists, who have examined very different populations across time and space, finding evidence of privacy-seeking behavior across all populations. You find evidence of privacy-seeking behavior in Java Valley, pre-industrialized Java Valley in the 1950s. You find evidence of privacy-seeking behavior in the Tuareg, the Blue Men, North Saharan tribes. You find evidence of privacy-seeking behavior in ancient Rome and in ancient Greece. If you look at the holy text of the main monotheistic religion, you find very explicit references to privacy, what nowadays we would call informational privacy, for instance. In the Quran, you find reference to privacy in the Torah. The very story of the Genesis is a story partly about privacy. What happens after Adam and Eve eat the fruit of knowledge? They discover their nakedness. They discover they are naked to the eyes of God. They discover their so-called privates part, right? The privates, and they decide to cover themselves. Pushing this envelope even further, I would also posit that animals sometimes seek privacy. Among apes, there are apes which mate in public. There are apes which do not like to mate in public at all. They seek seclusion. And cats and other animals are well known for seeking seclusion when they are sick. And you may be thinking, well, Alessandro, but that's not privacy, that's security. It is a very rational behavior for an animal which is sick and therefore already weakened to look for protection by bringing himself or herself away from other animals or from humankind. And my counterpoint would be, that's exactly the point. What if privacy is intimately related to some degree and need of security, and our ability to manage public and private is a way to try to have some degree of security or manage our degree of security in relation to the external world. So this is a very wild, big conjecture, which of course we cannot test directly. What we can do in a series of experiments, because most of our work is empirical, is to try to narrow it down to a more falsifiable hypothesis. So typically what we do, we start from a very grand idea, and then we end up testing a very narrow aspect of the idea. What we did in a series of unpublished work, in fact we finished it very recently and we are preparing now for submission, is to test whether, when it comes to privacy, people react to sensorial inputs in their physical environment. By sensorial, I refer to visual inputs, auditory inputs, even olfactory inputs, in a manner which cannot truly be explained by a so-called cost-benefit calculus of privacy benefits or privacy costs of sharing protecting data. So we wanted to see whether in the physical environment in which a person is placed will impact how they will act, for instance, online. Specifically, as they answer very sensitive questions about themselves, which is a typical way through which privacy experiments work. So often we do lab experiments, or sometimes online experiments, in which we randomly assign subjects with different experimental conditions, and we ask them sensitive questions about themselves, and what we capture is their willingness to share information about themselves, even very sensitive information about themselves, as function of some manipulation, something we change across the condition. In this particular experiment, which was a lab physical experiment, we set up a campus lab into 2 rooms separated by a 2-way glass, which is kind of a fancy way to simply say a glass. Basically, from room 1, you could look into room 2, and from room 2, you could look into room 1. The participants were in room 1 all the time, 1 per at a time. And they were asked to fill out a survey, an online survey on a computer, which was placed in room 1 close to the window, so that the subject would be looking at the computer and the screen, but would also be able to see what would happen in the other room. And what we did was to create, at a certain specific moment in the survey, a stimulus. Something would happen, usually in room 2, with some exceptions in room 1. Something would happen which would trigger either the sensorial recognition of another person in the other room, or the sensorial recognition of something else happening in the other room, or in the same room, which was not a human stimulus. Now, all of this may seem very confusing, but now that I show you the experiment, hopefully it will become much less confusing. In the first experiment, which was kind of a proof of concept experiment, the subject, or subjects in one condition, were always by themselves in the room, filling out the survey. That's kind of the absence of external additional stimuli. In the pairwise match condition of this experiment, while the subject was answering a survey, a guard, an actor dressed like a guard, entered the lab, pretending to be a guard from the university where we were running the experiment, and kind of started walking around the room, clearly confusing or at least surprising the subject. And what we wanted to see were the subjects in the condition where they were not interrupted would actually reveal more information about themselves, the subjects that were answering sensitive questions such as tell us about your most secret sexual fantasy, while actually a guard enters and starts hovering around them and actually overlooking what they're writing on the laptop. And the answer was obvious, and luckily, yes, it was exactly the case. People in the first group were revealing more about themselves and more sensitive information about themselves than people in the second group. But this was kind of a proof of concept. The other experiments were much more subtle. In the second experiment, we look for visual input. So in one condition, subjects would see in the other side of the room, at a certain moment in the experiment, a noiseless fan moving in front of the window. In the pairwise match condition, they would see another person, another confederate, an actor, pretending to work as a repair person on the glass. And what we wanted to see was whether, again, the presence of another person in the other room would trigger a decreased willingness to answer sensitive questions, and that was exactly the case. In the third experiment, we went for auditory stimuli. So at a certain moment in the experiment, the subjects in room 1 started hearing a sound coming from room 2, and this sound was the sound of a fax machine. In a matching pairwise condition, the sound was a muffled phone conversation. So hearing the voice of a human being. And once again, we found that hearing the voice of a human being decreased willingness to disclose relative to hearing the fax machine. The fourth experiment was perhaps the most interesting one. It was slightly different from the other 3 because in this experiment, at a certain specific moment, we asked subjects in the room 1 to open a drawer, take out a vial. This vial had been filled with clove oil, and they were asked to describe what kind of scent they were detecting. So subjects in the baseline condition were only given this kind of vial with clove oil. Subjects in the matching pairwise condition were asked to smell a vial also of clove oil to which we had added androstadienone, which is a putative pheromone produced by the human body. It's produced it can be found in your sweat if you exercise. Of course, the degree to which we added androstadienone was not consciously recognizable. We didn't want the kind of not interesting effect of how people start answering questions if they smell, you know, old shoes, old tennis shoes kind of smell. It was not consciously recognizable. But in fact, it is unconsciously recognizable. And what we found is, once again, that the addition of androstenedione decreased the subject's willingness to reveal sensitive information about themselves. So, extrapolating from these results seem to suggest that the detection, sensorial detection, auditory, olfactory, visual, other human being has an effect on people's willingness to disclose. It's compatible, doesn't prove the conjecture I posited earlier that to some degree, privacy reactions are innate. To another degree, they are certainly culturally dependent. But this brings another issue, which is online, we lack the sensorial stimuli which we use offline to negotiate privacy boundaries. Offline, we're very good at negotiating privacy boundaries. We instantly know how much to reveal or not to a person. Online, we don't often smell, see, or hear the third party, the Facebook, the Google, the data industry which may be monitoring this conversation. In fact, the challenge of understanding what happens to our data online is becoming harder and harder. An experiment we did a few years ago, this one is published, involved taking images coming from Facebook, primary profile photos, and see whether we can use this image to re-identify, using facial recognition, people on Carnegie Mellon campus. So we set up a little desk on one of the buildings in campus, and we had students who were passing by to stop for a little experiment. We took a shot with a webcam over their face, and then we uploaded the shot to a cloud where, as the students were filling out a survey about their usage of social media, we were in fact in real time comparing the webcam shot to images which we had previously downloaded from Facebook profiles for all the students at Carnegie Mellon University. At the end of the survey, the student had to fill out the last page, which had been dynamically updated with the 10 best matching photos which we had found in real time. By the 10 best matching photo, I mean the photos which recognizer believed had the highest matching score, and therefore the highest probability of having the same subject in the photo. And we asked the subject, do you see yourself in this photo or not? Do you recognize the subject here? It's there in the back, which is quite remarkable because the subject has different facial hair, and actually the image from Facebook is quite low resolution. That gives you a sense of how facial recognition is getting better and better. In this experiment, we recognize 1 out of 3 subjects. Now, take this for a moment and moving for a second to another study. 3 years earlier, actually 4 years earlier, we did a study which was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, in which we showed that Social Security numbers, the issuance of, so the way Social Security numbers, which are very sensitive in the US, the way they're issued can be, in a way, reverse engineered. And as an application, we showed that we could start from demographic data. The people were openly disclosing about themselves on Facebook, state of birth and date of birth, and we could take this data. We could combine it with data from the Social Security Administration, the so-called DMF, Death Master File, which is a database of Social Security numbers for people who are dead. And we could interpolate statistically the 2 data sets. So demographic data of people who are alive and Social Security numbers of people who are dead to end up predicting the Social Security numbers for people on Facebook. Okay? Statistically, it's not a deterministic prediction because the SSN is 9 digits, 1 billion possibilities. But still, pretty accurate predictions in certain cases. Do you see where I'm going with this? If we kind of chain the 2 experiments together, the facial recognition experiment and the social security number experiment, the story becomes, can we start from a face and use this social media data and facial recognition, give a name to the person. Once we have a name, we can find online demographic data. Once we have demographic data, we can try to predict the social security number. Therefore, can we predict social security numbers from a face? And the answer is yes, of course. Lots of noise and lots of error. If I were an identity theft, I would not choose this as my career path, as my vector of attack. But as a proof of concept, it's very powerful. Because in this example, what Paul Holm describes as data accretion, which is a broader point I wanted to make. We reveal so much data about ourselves. And data analytics is becoming so sophisticated that we can start from something anonymous. From that, we can find names. From names, we can find public information which is not particularly sensitive or dangerous. But from this information, we can predict something much more sensitive, much more personal. And then we close the circle. We connect it back to the anonymous phase. So the last point I wanted to make is, perhaps your question is, okay, so what? So what if we share willingly or not, knowingly or not, so much personal information? Well, Let me give you an example of something which happens every time you go online, even if you are not aware of. It's called real-time bidding. So more and more, the advertising ecosystem can be works like this. Simplifying a little, because the advertising ecosystem is very complex. But these are the three main players. The publishers, so the websites which publish ads, the advertisers, the firms which want to put advertising, and the ad exchange, which takes the bids from the firms and then shows the advertising. For instance, if you are a consumer and you go to CNN website, and there are maybe New Balance and Nike which are selling shoes, and the CNN sees you, maybe sees a cookie on your computer, passes some information to the ad exchange about you. This information could contain information about maybe your gender, your age, and so forth. Some of this information is passed to the advertising firm, who now must decide how much to bid to show you an ad. They make the bid, they send it to the ad exchange chooses the winning bid, and therefore, based on the winning bid, it shows a certain ad, okay? Now, most of the economic analysis about this kind of exchange, which, by the way, happens in milliseconds, you don't even know that it is happening, focuses on just two players, the consumer and the advertisers. We wanted to refine this economic model by adding the ad exchange. So we wanted to see what happens in very stylized macroeconomic models. What happens, specifically what happens to welfare, to the allocation of surplus generated by the economic transactions, once you specifically add the exchange, and once you modulate the amount of information that the ad exchange knows about you. And these are some of the preliminary results. This, again, is unpublished work. We have three types of scenarios. The ad exchange knows everything about you, complete information. The ad exchange has your horizontal information. Horizontal information in economic lingo is whether you prefer Nike or New Balance, so your preference between the two goods. Or the ad exchange only has your vertical information, how much you are willing to pay. You are a high-value consumer who can pay a lot, lower-value consumer you can pay less. When the ad exchange has only horizontal information, this is a distribution of the surplus from the transaction. Everyone gets something. Everyone is winning. But of course, different players win more or less. When there is vertical information, you see that the amount of surplus which goes to the firms goes less and less, and the amount which goes to the intermediary, to the ad exchange, goes higher and higher. But when the ad exchange has all of your information, do you see what happens to consumer surplus? Goes to zero. It's completely taken away by the firm, the advertisers, and the exchange, the intermediary. So the point here is that more information can lead to everyone winning. But more and more and more information can actually affect the distribution of welfare to a degree that then may actually adversely affect consumers, which brings me back to big data. So there is a way to consider big data as, in economic terms, as something which will make the economic pie grow larger, right? Big data is saving lives, as Dr. Tull was mentioning earlier. But there is also one way in which data can and potentially will be used, which is simply about changing the allocation of the economic pie. And I believe that privacy has a huge role to play in which kind of big data we will get, which kind of society we will live in. Privacy as well as privacy-enhancing technologies, homomorphic encryption, blind signatures. So all those technologies which allow us to have data and protection at the same time, because please don't believe those who say that privacy is antithetical to big data. This is confuted by 20, 30 years of research in computer science. So, if you're interested in any of these more, feel free to check out these references. We published a study in Science, which is a review of the behavioral literature on privacy a few months ago. And we are about to publish in the Journal of Economic Literature a review of the economic privacy literature. That one is forthcoming, so not out yet, but you can find it on SSRN, or you can just send me an email. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Any question, comment? Maybe I have one myself in the first place. I was wondering, I mean, if we are so easy to cheat that maybe if we are filling our Facebook privacy consent and a cat or a person moves behind us, we will say no or yes. I mean, can we really rely only on ourselves, let's say, to deal with these issues of privacy? That is it a matter of training people to kind of overcome these biases and really think hard and avoid being conditioned by the sound in the other room? Or is it necessary to take a broader approach somehow?
That's a beautiful question. The short answer is that I do not believe, this may be a controversial statement, I do not believe that individual responsibility is enough. In fact, I strongly don't believe it's enough. It's important, but it's not enough because it's so easy to bypass the traditional tools we have been using, especially in the United States, for protecting privacy, which is notice and consent, transparency and choice. There are beautiful words. But if you look at what transparency and choice really do, is when you look at scientific evidence on the impact of privacy policies and notices, or the impact of control choice settings, is abysmal. People ignore privacy policies. That doesn't mean that they don't care about privacy. Let's go back to the studies I was showing you at the beginning. People sometimes react paradoxically to privacy settings. The more control we give people to their data, and we showed it in several experiments which then have been confirmed with field data by others, the more control we give to people, you know what happens? The more risk they go and take with the personal information. It's a phenomenon related to overconfidence. Kind of like when we ask people to wear seat belts, people start driving faster because they feel more protected. So
it happens also online.
It happens particularly online. So transparency and choice are, to use mathematical language that we all speak here, necessary, not sufficient condition for privacy. We have to be transparent, we have to give control, but it's clearly not enough because they can be bypassed in so many different ways. You can nudge people in so many directions. You can also try to nudge them for privacy, and we have a stream of work about nudging for privacy. But it's tough, it's really tough. To me, the problem is not just an individual problem, and we do need individual responsibility, it's a societal problem. It's a policy-making issue.
Okay. Any question or comment?
Hello, thanks for your talk.
Thank you.
So as a normal person, I would have, reacting to this, I have two possibilities, right? I could, for example, share less data. That would be one thing. I'm opting out of Facebook and so on. I think a lot of people have studied that, but what about another direction, sharing wrong data, like bringing noise into the system? Which direction should I choose? Thank you.
So it's a beautiful question, right? Although I would like to say that there is a third option, right? That actually as a society we create better safeguards so they don't put you into this dilemma where either you share less and you give up on the benefits which can come to you from sharing data, or you start revealing bad data which decreases the economic value of information as a social good. Because again, wearing back my economics hat, information can be a social good. We can benefit, right? Society can benefit from data such as the examples that Dr. O'Toole was mentioning earlier. If we reveal bad information, we are decreasing that good, the value of the good. But there is a way in between. There is. And again, I go back to computer science, homomorphic encryption, blind signature. I'm a strong believer in technology, in its power to give us the cake and eat it too, in allowing people to share data while data is protected. I just don't believe that simply individual responsibility can bring us there. We have the technology, we have people who sometimes want privacy, we need policy effort to make that work.
One more question, and we go to the next speaker.
Thank you. That was very motivating for me and very new. I was wondering, in your initial motivation for us, you said that we are looking for privacy because it is a kind of security for us. But in politics, we find that people are often willing to give up privacy to gain security. So this is clearly a contradiction. How would you address this?
That's a fantastic point. The selective sharing information can be a tool the individual can use to enhance their utility. And I'm talking like an economist. But what I mean is that sometimes it's about sharing less. Sometimes, in certain conditions, it's about sharing more. But you know what? Sharing more is not the opposite of privacy. Privacy is about being able to choose how much you want to share. So privacy is about being able to modulate your information sharing so that with a friend with whom you need to share a secret, you can share a secret without fear of the secret going public. With another person, you may not want to share the information. What the internet is causing, however, is a decrease in our ability to control how these information flows are being used. Because we don't know how much information we are revealing, we don't know how it will be used, we don't know the consequences of these usages. So that's a correction that you allow me, thank you for your question, that you allow me to do. Privacy is not necessarily the stoppage of information flow, it's the management of information flows.